Hi everyone, and welcome back to season 3 of Commerce Meets Law, a podcast we talk about various commercial topics and how they interact with the legal profession. This season is all about people who've broken barriers and stereotypes, who've decided to not just step outside the box, but show that these boxes simply do not exist. Our guest today is one of my favourites. It's John Dove, a criminal barrister at Charterhouse Chambers and the founder of Speed Mooting and the Advocacy Club. This episode starts by discussing John's decision to complete the BPTC and the LPC, so the courses to qualify as a barrister and a solicitor, and the challenges he faced in gaining pupillage. We then explore his journey as a paralegal and a criminal solicitor, right up until he joined Charterhouse Chambers last year. Now, this episode needs to be heard by all of those considering a career in criminal law, as we also discuss John's view on the income and the working conditions for criminal barristers, which brings the right level of nuance to such an important conversation. As the loyal viewers of the Commerce Meets Law YouTube channel would already know, I took part in the National Speed Mooting competition founded by John earlier this year and thoroughly enjoyed my time because of the format of the moot and the amazing groups of people it brought together, which is also something we discuss in detail during the latter half of this episode. Having had the opportunity to meet John whilst participating in the competition, which was held at Liverpool John Moores University this year, I knew that his personal story and the growth of speed mooting, which is something that he started more than a decade ago, needed to be brought to Commerce Meets Law. Links to the competition and all that John has organised to prepare the next generation of barristers is all going to be linked down below. So definitely do check it out as it's open to people of all ages, no matter what journey and what part of the journey you're on right now. And just a quick request before we get into the conversation, I'd really appreciate if you could kindly give the podcast a follow and a rating on Spotify. The higher the better, but I leave the rating up to you as always, as it really helps Commerce Meets Law reach more listeners. Without further ado, I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you right at the end.
Hi, John. Welcome to Commerce Meets Law. Really excited to have you on the podcast. And this has been a long time coming, so I'm really excited for everyone to hear our conversation today. Before we get started in talking about your academic and your professional journey, we have a icebreaker on the podcast. So your question is, in your opinion, what is your superpower?
Okay, well, that's an interesting one, and it's something I've been thinking about for some time. I would say my superpower is probably the fact that I'm a pretty optimistic person. So I think that that's what helps me in life. That's what helps me overcome challenges, that I always look for solutions and think, no matter what situation you're in, you can always look for a positive outcome. So I think I'm optimistic in everything that I do, and I think that's what's helped me get to where I am in life. So if you said what is your superpower, I would say optimism.
I love that. And I think that, in today's world, I feel like it's so important to have that optimism because I think we have so much more information around us and we can sort of take that in a negative sense and sort of look at the have the pessimism of it, but also look at the optimistic and the opportunities there as well. So that's a really great superpower to have for sure. And with that, then, where do you sort of first develop an interest in law and think that that would be a potential career path for you?
Okay, so I think I first had the idea of becoming a barrister when I was probably around 14 or 15. And I think that I'm trying to remember back now where this came from. I probably saw, a legal TV show, probably like an American style TV show or something. One of these, quite dramatic, someone walking around the courtroom and shouting at witnesses, giving a highly polished closing speech. I thought, you know what, I could do that as a career. And then obviously discovered that our equivalent is a barrister in the UK courts. So that's where my interest in the law initially came from. I have to say, I didn't know of any lawyers, so it's not as if, I developed my interest that way. It will have been through seeing lawyers on TV.
And I think, what I found really interesting in your journey, especially after your degree, is you sort of completed both the bar course as well as the LPC. So at that point, having spoken about your interest within the bar and that side of the profession, what was your sort of idea in terms of what career you wanted and what challenges did you face in getting there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the plan was always to become a barrister. So, as I say, from about 14 or 15, that's what I was thinking about. And then even when going to university, that was the plan. So I went to the University of Liverpool, studied a law degree with the goal of becoming a barrister at the end of it. As many of your listeners probably know, it is very, very difficult to secure a career at the bar. It's very difficult to obtain a pupillage. So I went through, did my law degree, did the bar course straight afterwards. So I came out at, 21, 22, however old you are at that age, suddenly trying to apply for pupillage. And it's very difficult. And I didn't do enough, I don't think, at the undergraduate level in terms of extracurricular activities. And where I really started to notice that was at the point of drafting pupillage applications. So, I'd never heard of the Inns of Court at that point, so I'd never applied for scholarships. So obviously, when the question came up, what scholarships do you have? That box was blank. What awards do you have? Well, I didn't do enough mooting or advocacy competitions or anything of that nature. So many of the questions on the form I struggled to answer. So at this point, having finished the bar course, I then went and became a paralegal, as most people do, trying to build up some experience. And I think that working as a paralegal helped because I worked in a solicitor's firm and I was doing tasks that barristers and solicitors would do. So I was drafting pleadings, particulars of claim. I would draft written applications to the court. I was even doing a little bit of advocacy in district judges' chambers. So advocacy in relation to pre-action disclosure hearings, default judgment applications, infant settlement hearings, things of that nature, stage threes. So this was all building up my skill base. And it meant that as the years went by, I was able to fill in the blanks, the boxes that previously I couldn't answer, I was starting to answer those. So I was then starting to get interviews, after probably 12 months of paralegaling, I started to get pupillage interviews. And then as time went on, I was getting to final stage interviews and just missing out. So I thought, I need to qualify. It doesn't matter whether it's barrister, solicitor, otherwise, I just need to qualify. So I thought, well, I'll go and do an LPC because having done the bar course, you're exempt from half an LPC anyway. So it meant I could do part-time LPC whilst working and do that within 1 year. So I could work full-time and then just do the LPC on a Saturday. And then whichever came first, I would take, whether I got a training contract or a pupillage, I would accept. And then lo and behold, the training contract came up first. So I qualified as a solicitor.
I think that that's something that possibly a lot of people can relate to, at that side of going to university and thinking that, like school, the key focus is all about academics. And whilst that's so important, some people may still miss that, all these extracurriculars are just as important, particularly when, it just gets more and more competitive each year. If you could sort of go back to the John at that time, go back to that person at university, what do you think you would say to that person to maybe ensure that you could have, kind of increased your chance of success, to kind of get a pupillage straight away?
Okay, well, what I would say is from the point at which you start university, start thinking about, if your desire is to become a barrister, start thinking about pupillage from day one in first year. So start looking at pupillage application forms, start looking at chambers profiles for very junior barristers, within the chambers that you're interested in. And you'll see some of the experiences that they have. You'll see what qualifications they have, what scholarships they have, for example. But also, by looking at the application forms, you'll look at the questions and you'll know what chambers are asking about. And then you can sort of reverse engineer it and start thinking about what you're going to do over those 3 years to fill in the blanks. The other big thing is to get involved with a society, or at least one society, whilst at university. So most universities tend to have a law society or bar society, advocacy society, etc. Get a position. Doesn't matter what it is, but get a position within a society, because that's a good example of showing how you've got responsibility. And that's something that chambers will often ask about. And the other nice thing that comes with that is sometimes it might be, the bar liaison or chambers liaison representative. And naturally, you'll start building links with chambers and barristers, judiciary, or whoever it might be. So that's always helpful for you for when you come to apply at the end. So that would be my big advice. Get involved early on and look at the forms and think about the questions you need to answer 3 or 4 years down the line.
I think those are really practical. I think apply to, whether you want to go down the solicitor route or the barrister route, and looking at those vacation scheme or chambers applications and seeing, well, which of these are blanks to me right now and how can I fill them during my time at university, especially in first year when perhaps the pressure is a little bit less, you've got a bit more time on your hands, and you have that time to get involved and figure out what you enjoy, particularly if you're still a bit unsure whether you want to go down the solicitor or the barrister route. Fast forwarding a little bit, we spoke a bit about sort of your paralegal experience, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your training contract, because I think that, especially within kind of solicitors and city firm applications, we talk a lot about city law firms or sort of the big firms, but not really so many firms which are specializing in sort of niche areas of the law. So could you tell us a bit about your training contract and sort of, what it looked like over those 2 years?
Yeah, definitely. So, I did my training contract with MAJ Law, who are we're a smaller firm at the time. So when I first joined the firm, there were probably 9 or 10 employees in total. That would include solicitors, secretaries, paralegals, etc. So it was a very small firm. And the nice thing about that, for example, you were talking about the large sort of corporate firms. The nice thing about practicing in such a small firm is you see everything that goes on within that firm on a day-to-day business. So you're on a day-to-day basis, I should say. So you're seeing, sort of what the secretaries are doing, how they're liaising with the clients. You're looking at what the solicitors are doing within the firm. You're working very closely with, for example, the senior partner, the chap who owned the firm. I'd work on cases with him. So it was nice being able to see everything that's going on a day-to-day basis. And what I really enjoyed and where I learned a lot was actually seeing the way in which a small law firm is run, so seeing the business side of it as well. So not just the legal side and working on the day-to-day elements of the case, seeing how a law firm operates as a business, which is something, I mean, I don't know, I've never had a training contract in a bigger firm, but maybe something you might not have that level of exposure to if you're in a larger firm. So it was really enjoyable. In terms of the sort of day-to-day of what I will be doing in terms of my training contract, so I would spend time speaking to new potential inquiries. I would spend time on the phone speaking to clients. I would work on a caseload as well. So I'll be conducting the day-to-day litigation work on these cases, and also preparing the cases for court. So the solicitors would conduct advocacy in-house, so I'd prepare the cases for them. Or if it was going off to counsel, I would draft instructions to counsel as well. So I was seeing pretty much most elements of the cases all the way throughout. So it was a really good way of building up my knowledge and my skills within criminal law.
I think that that's such an important bit to highlight, because especially in law firms, and I think in a lot of sort of small businesses, whether that's a startup or a smaller law firm, you really get to see all elements of that business, because there are just a couple of employees, and a lot of times you're doing a lot of different tasks rather than sort of just being one small part of a very, very big system or business. And I think that especially when you're younger, is so useful, because you see all elements and you see, okay, let me try and see which bits I'm good at or where my strengths are, and perhaps, what I sort of enjoy as well. I think that at that point that you mentioned at the start, the barrister, sort of becoming a barrister was always the goal. So having worked as a solicitor, which of those aspects do you sort of enjoy, perhaps some unexpected ones, and which ones made you think actually perhaps being a barrister is still the route for me?
Yeah, definitely. So I think in terms of when I was a solicitor, naturally I enjoyed the advocacy element. So because of the firm I worked for, because they did criminal law, I spent a lot of time in court. So naturally, I enjoyed that. In terms of other elements of the job as well, it was quite nice seeing a case through all the way throughout as well. So you pick up a case at the start, and sometimes you might speak to a client on the phone as a brand new inquiry, and that file might come to me if they were to instruct the firm, and I would work on it all the way throughout. So it was nice having that close contact. I think that part of the job swings both ways though, because as a barrister, I'm focused solely on advocacy.
Yeah.
So I'm brought into a case whenever a case goes to court, and beyond that, I might have to draft a defense statement or the odd skeleton argument or something. But for the most part, my job is advocacy. So I come in, deal with the advocacy element, and that's that. So I don't have to worry about the continuing elements of the case. So whilst I did enjoy that, it's also a little bit of, I wouldn't say a negative point, but something that I don't necessarily miss. And the nice thing is, the client is not your direct point of contact. So you're not working there, you're getting a phone call. Oh, such and such a client wants to speak to you. Oh, the CPS want to speak to you about this file. Your day isn't interrupted with phone calls. When you're a barrister, you're pretty much free to crack on with your work, as it were. But the big the huge positive I see of going to the bar is the fact that I'm now self-employed, and I thoroughly enjoy being the master of my own universe, as it were. Probably work much longer hours than I did when I was a solicitor. But to a point, I'm in control of my working life. So if I decide, I want to take a day off here, I haven't got to seek approval, as it were. Obviously, I don't get paid when I take time off, but I've got that option there. And also in terms of the way in which my career goes, if I want to focus on a specific type of crime, I've got that level of control there. So there's an element of control now that I'm self-employed, but it's by no means any easier.
Definitely. I think that, that really shows that there is no right answer. It's not like one is the right way or one is the best way and one isn't. It's so dependent on what you kind of value personally, whether you do value agency and having, kind of ownership of your time, or whether you enjoy perhaps having that direct point of contact with clients. You enjoy speaking to lots of sort of lay people as opposed to just, the point of contact being a solicitor or being another legal professional. I guess maybe playing, devil's advocate slightly, one aspect of the bar that people may sort of be fearful of is that aspect of being self-employed. Whilst that gives you a lot of ownership, that also comes with the idea that your pay may not be as kind of secure and it may not look the same every month. Is that something that you sort of ever thought about, or did the other aspects sort of take over that?
So I think the key thing you need to think about there is you need discipline. So you need to ensure, because as you say, there may be months where your finances will change in the sense that you may not make exactly the same month on month.
Yeah.
So you need to watch what you're spending every month and make sure that you're not going over and above before try and avoid this going into a Dave Ramsey lecture, but obviously be careful with spending. And also remember that you're liable for your own tax affairs, so your own income tax and your own VAT. So make sure that you've got a system in place whereby you are consistently putting money away. Figure out what percentage of your income that needs to be, and make sure you put that away, put it in a safe account, and you can't touch it. So every quarter when your VAT bill comes up, you've got the money to pay it. Every year when your tax bill comes up, you've got the money to pay for that. And also, don't forget that you'll have your own costs associated with your practice, whatever it might be, but there's always going to be costs involved that you need to pay for, whether it's, professional memberships or textbooks or whatever it might be. You need the money there to pay for those things. So ensure that you're regularly putting money away. But if you've got the discipline there, it shouldn't be much of a problem. But it's certainly something I was thinking about when I transitioned to the bar, because I was in, a very secure employed job, very nice civil service pension there. And then I took the leap and jumped to the self-employed bar. And I was worried at first that in terms of how much work is actually available, will I need to build up contacts, etc. My diary has been busy since day one, so that fear thankfully hasn't been realised for me. And I think part of the reason for that is just how busy the criminal bar is at this moment in time. I think I've come to the self-employed criminal bar at a particularly a particularly fertile time, if I put it that way. So, I don't think it's always this good. I've heard that it goes in peaks and troughs, but certainly the time at which I've joined, it's been so busy. And I've been in court virtually every day since joining Chambers.
Yeah, and I think that's, what you want to hear, as a barrister. Whilst of course, the criminal bar means that you are dealing with very sensitive cases and, kind of day to day. I think as a barrister, that shows you that, you're still sort of helping people in your small way, and you're ensuring that work is sort of coming through, which of course is a critical aspect, for, in order to ensure that the justice system, kind of continues to function as well. Just before we talk a little bit about, your sort of life as a criminal barrister, I want to just take a one step back and just talk a little bit about your time with the CPS, because I think that especially at law school, we get told about the solicitor route and the bar route, but not really a lot about the civil service and what kind of life at civil service can look like. So can you tell us a bit about, sort of your time at the CPS, and perhaps any misconceptions you had before you kind of entered the civil service?
Okay, all right. So I worked for the CPS as a senior Crown prosecutor. So I was there for about, I think, 3.5 years in total. So I joined as a senior Crown prosecutor and left in that same position. In terms of my role, I would regularly undertake review work and also charging work. So, for example, that would involve drafting pre-charge advices for the police. So to break that down, what that means, the police would arrest somebody for an offence, and they would generally investigate the offence and build up a full file of evidence. Once that full file of evidence is ready and the police feel that they've investigated the case as far as they possibly can, they then submit the file to the Crown Prosecution Service for what's called a charging decision. So let's say the case were to come to me. I would review all of the evidence. So I would look at the witness statements involved. I would look at any exhibits, videos, etc. So all of the evidence. And I would make a decision as to whether the case can be charged. So whether the full code test has been met. If I authorize a charge, I would draft a written advice that goes back to the police, and they say, yeah, let's get that charged. Let's get the individual charged. Or if I didn't think that there was sufficient evidence, I would draft advice to that regard, and it would go no further. Sometimes I might say, well, there may be prospects, but we still need to investigate X, Y, and Z. So can you look at these aspects for me and look into that? Now, that's what we call the full code test, daytime charging. Sometimes the police might arrest somebody for an offence and they need a discharging decision very, very quickly. So you may have heard about the sort of 24-hour custody clock. So when the police arrest somebody, they need a decision within 24 hours. So occasionally I would be required to provide charging decisions in those circumstances as well. So what would happen is the police obviously wouldn't have the full file because they've not investigated everything. But what would happen is they would submit a file to me. I would look at it. I would apply what's called the threshold test. It's a 5-stage test, so I won't bore you with all of the details of the test. But the long and short is, as long as I thought that there were potentially reasonable prospects there, then you would charge that person and they'd be remanded into custody there and then, for them to appear in court the following day. So that was part of my job. I would also have a general caseload. So similarly to how I did at MAJ Law, I would have my own caseload of cases that I was running. But quite unusual for a senior Crown prosecutor, I would also conduct advocacy in court as well, partly because of how keen I am on advocacy. So most senior Crown prosecutors tend to do review work only, or certainly in the CPS area I was located. But given how keen I was on advocacy, I would go spend some time in court as well prosecuting. So quite a mixed bag there. You were asking about misconceptions. I genuinely didn't know what to expect when joining the CPS. So I didn't really have any misconceptions or any ideas about it. I think, you see a lot in the media about the way in which the CPS charge cases, for example. Certainly what I can say from my time there and my other colleagues is that a lot of time does go into these, decisions, looking at these cases and such that the right decision is made. And that's what the CPS is all about, making sure that the right person is charged for the right offence. So we certainly spent a lot of time ensuring that we dealt with these cases properly from the outset.
And in that point of kind of transitioning from MAJ Law, from a sort of, private practice into a more public facing role, did you feel like there was sort of any more pressure on you in the sense of the kind of the position that you held? Or did you feel like the work that you were doing was sort of still on the same length as what you were doing when you were MAJ law?
Yeah, I think the pressures were different actually. Thankfully, I'm one of those. You drop me in, and it's sort of I can swim if you drop me in, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think the pressures were slightly different there, as you can imagine, because the CPS are dealing with. I wouldn't even want to put a figure on it, but you can imagine how many criminal offences the
Yeah.
CPS are dealing with at any one time. So there's naturally always going to be pressure there. But and as you say, I think it's a very different environment working for a public body versus working for sort of a private law firm. But yeah, I think I thoroughly enjoyed the time there. And the good thing about the CPS, or the nice thing, is that you generally work within teams. So within my review team, we had about 15 lawyers, and you can always bounce ideas off each other. You always had regular contact with your line manager as well. So there's always a really good support network there at the CPS.
I think that that will be so useful for people to hear as well, particularly for those who do want to be in that more public facing role, even whether that's for a couple of years like you were, or for a more longer term, to understand what those pressures are like, and knowing that there's still that team kind of support element that you have at sort of a private law firm as well, or in a set of chambers. Now, coming to your time as a criminal barrister since October 2023, I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the experiences that you bring as kind of a former solicitor, and also having been a Crown prosecutor. Did you find that a lot of your sort of colleagues had those similar kind of experiences, or was it more common for people to have kind of done university, perhaps done a master's, and then started their time as a barrister?
Yeah, I think so. Most people at the bar, I would imagine, have probably gone straight through and, not practiced as solicitors previously, will have gone straight through and done pupillage, maybe a little bit of paralegaling in between, as a lot of people have done. There are a certain number of ex-solicitors at the bar, and I think that experience is really helpful because um, from my time as a solicitor, I was speaking to potential clients from the very outset. So when they're first there, the anxieties they're facing, how worried they are, and you learn how to speak to those people and deal with what they're going through effectively. Also, I think, all the time that I spent as, a paralegal initially, and then as a solicitor, where you've got that day-to-day contact, I built up really good client care skills, I think, which is massively, massively important. And then the final aspect of that is you understand the pressures that solicitors face. And I think that helps me in this role, because it means that I'm able to build my practice in a way that I work closely with solicitors and help them. So um, I know how difficult the job of a solicitor can be. I know why, potentially sometimes things may not go according to plan in relation to a case. And it's not about sort of it's about working closely with the solicitor and making sure that we're effectively all one team, myself as the barrister and the solicitors. So I think understanding the pressures that they face helps me in this practice.
Definitely. I think that, having that sort of insight into what the other party that you're sort of dealing with on a day-to-day basis is going through, having had experience of it yourself, I think really helps, develop that empathy and, understand sort of the pressures that they're facing. As we sort of spoke about, I guess the dream was always to get to this point and sort of become a barrister. So having, been in that position now for nearly a year, do you feel like it's sort of everything that you thought it would be, or are there any elements or challenges that perhaps you hadn't expected?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. Um, so far so good is what I would say. I've thoroughly
Yeah.
enjoyed the experience so far. Um, any unexpected challenges? I think yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think it through. I don't think there are any unexpected challenges I've come across so far. So it's been pretty good actually. Been plain sailing. Um, yeah, no, sorry, yeah, I don't think there have been.
That's amazing, and I think that, that is really, especially for people who are considering criminal law, considering the bar. That would be, you know, excellent to hear. Of course, keeping in mind that perhaps everyone's experiences will be slightly different.
Yeah.
In terms of your sort of practice, and you said that, you know, being at the bar and being self-employed means you can develop your practice in your own way. What are the sort of key areas or most common things that you tend to practice in within criminal law? And out of those, are there any that you still find sort of really challenging in terms of the facts of the case?
Okay, so the way that my practice is structured at the moment, it's around 50% general crime in the Crown Court, and then 50% private motoring cases in the Magistrates Court. So naturally, coming back to MAJ, I built up a wealth of knowledge and experience in relation to motoring cases, and it is a very niche area of law. So that's why I deal with a lot of those types of cases, and I work for a number of different specialist law firms in that regard. And then in the Crown Court, I do general criminal law, so that covers the full spectrum. So you sort of drugs, dishonesty, violence, fraud cases, sex offences, so really broad range. And I think that in terms of if there are any that are quite difficult, I, I think with the way in which I approach the cases, I don't think there's any that's particularly more difficult, you know, but you're asking about the factual matrix. I don't think that there are any that become more difficult. You just become accustomed to how to deal with these cases. So you take each case on its own facts, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I think that is an element that, you know, sort of especially dealing with whether it's sort of areas like family law or criminal law, where sometimes the facts can be really difficult. You know, the more experience you have and the more clients you have, in a way, you sort of, you know, get used to that as being part of your job, and balance that sort of having empathy as well as making sure that you're able to present the facts of the court as well.
I, I agree with you, and I think you touched on a really important point there. And I think on a personal level, I think it's maturity. And I've mentioned this before on other podcasts. You know, I've come to the bar at the age of 33, so I've built up a lot of experience, a lot of life experience in that time. And I think that that's helped me when I come to these cases, because as you can imagine, a lot of these cases can be quite upsetting for the parties involved. They can be quite traumatic. But because, you know, I've built up that level of maturity, I think that helps me both in preparing for the cases, but also dealing with the issues involved. Whereas had I been at the bar 10 years ago, you know, at the age of 23, would I have been able to deal with these cases? I don't know, is the honest answer. So I think that level of maturity has certainly helped me.
Definitely. I think that is, you know, such an important sort of aspect for people to hear, to know how much life experience plays a role in terms of how you deal with your clients, and sort of how you deal with your work. The other aspect I sort of wanted to talk about was, especially within criminal law, I think that sometimes what can hold people back is, as we've sort of seen in a lot of the media, in terms of sort of the income levels for criminal barristers and how difficult it has been. From your perspective, does that sort of really depend on the kind of cases you're working on? Do you feel like it's sort of a national thing, or is it very heavily dependent on sort of which part of the country you're in?
I don't think it changes depending on where you are in the country. I think the levels in terms of legal aid rates are sort of national. I could be wrong on that, because I've never practiced in London, for example, but you know, that's my understanding of that. And when you're at university, the big thing people always tell you is that if you become a criminal barrister, you're going to be poor. You know, you're going to be on the poverty line. That's not the reality. I think the reality of the criminal bar is it's somewhere between what you're told at university in terms of, you know, you're going to make no money, and you know, what you see in the newspapers when they talk about criminal barristers being fat cats driving Lamborghinis. I don't think either of those statements are necessarily true, and it's somewhere in between. So I speak to a lot of people that are put off the criminal bar because they think they're never going to make any money. That's not true. You will make a good living at the criminal bar. You'll make a reasonable living. Um, if you were to have a practice where you're regularly involved in trials in the Crown Court, the fees are not that bad. So, you know, you're not going to be making the same as your counterparts doing corporate law or whatever it might be. You're not going to be making as much for trials as you would do as if you were in different types of law, but the fees are still not bad for trials. So if you have a practice where you're regularly involved in trials, then the money is not bad at all. Where the problems arise is the fact that there are certain elements of the job for which you just simply don't get paid. So, for example, sometimes you might be required to draft a defense statement on a case, be paid for that. Sometimes you might have, an interim application and you're doing another piece of drafting, you wouldn't be paid for that. There might be sometimes additional conferences for which you're not paid. And also, certain mention hearings in the Crown Court are not very well paid at all. And, they can involve a lot of prep. So you'll see people go online and they'll say, I did this case, I traveled this long, did this much drafting, this much waiting. And when you work it out on this case, I was paid less than the minimum wage. And that can happen from time to time. Obviously, it's not happening all the time because you wouldn't stay in the job if every single day you were on less than the minimum wage. At some point that would become unsustainable and you simply wouldn't be in the job. But the reality is there are a lot of hearings for which the money simply isn't enough. So really what you need a good balance within your practice. But as long as you have that, you'll make a good living at the criminal bar. So whilst that I don't think the pay is enough for what for certainly for the amount of work that goes in. And it's certainly not sort of Lamborghini money or anything like that, what you see in the newspapers. You're not going to be on the poverty line.
I think that that's really, really important. I think what that provides is nuance to the conversation, because I think that, what's missing there is, these headlines, which obviously want to sensationalize things and want to sort of go at doing one extreme or the other. And whilst there are clearly issues in terms of pay and in terms of conditions, I think also understanding that that is not the situation every day. And it's not the situation for every barrister at every single point of time, I think is an important one for people to hear, particularly those who are passionate about criminal law and are purely put off by thinking that it will be completely unsustainable for them to sort of work in the industry. And I think, I hope that people can listen to that and pursue that if it is something that they wish to do.
Yeah.
The other aspect.
No, it's just because if you are interested in criminal law, go for it. If you want to be at the criminal bar, go for it, because eventually you'll make, as I say, you'll make enough to live on. And also, if that's where your passion lies, then that's where naturally you're going to progress. I always remember going to an event at university and I was speaking to a solicitor, and I think I might have said, because I was one of these at university, I would bounce around and think about different areas of law. And he was a commercial solicitor, and I said, "Oh, I think I've got an interest in commercial." He goes, "Okay, well, what's commercial law?" I was a first year, I couldn't describe what commercial law was, and he goes, "People do this all the time. They see something, they think it's going to be well paid, and they go, well, that's what I'm going to pursue." But the problem is when you go down that route and you pursue a certain area just because you think that's where the money is, you won't enjoy it. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing, you won't progress as well as you would have done otherwise. If you progress, if you go into something in which you're actually interested, it doesn't matter what area it is, you can make money within that area and you're going to naturally have a much more enjoyable career and progress much further. So whatever your interest is, follow that. Don't just think, oh, I'll go for whichever area because that's the most lucrative. That's a recipe for disaster.
Definitely. And that's such an important point. I think, especially within law, a lot of people think up to getting the pupillage or up to getting the training contract and not really what their career trajectory will look like after that. And we're going to have longer and longer careers as we go through. And so remembering that you want it to be sustainable, not just, sprinting to that kind of opportunity after university, I think is so key. And like you said, the more you enjoy it, the more you know that you put the hard work in order to progress within that field. And I think, speaking of that, the aspect that sort of kind of ensured that we could be introduced was the national speed mooting competition, and so that's sort of what I want to talk about next. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got started with the competition in 2011 and sort of how the idea sort of came about?
Yeah, so funnily enough, this was not long after finishing my bar course. So I think I might have just started as a paralegal. And I was in Wetherspoons with a mate. Ironically, neither of us were drinking that night, both on Coke. Coca-Cola, that is. And we're having a chat. While we were chatting about mooting in the pub, I'll never know, but we were. And we were talking about mooting competition from when we were students. And we were talking about some of the problems with them. So certainly the problems I found with mooting competitions when I was at university was that there were certainly the internal ones, you needed to be in the right clique to be involved. External ones I never found out about. So once again, you needed to be within the right clique to be selected and put forwards. I didn't really have any friends that were interested in advocacy, and moots were always 2-on-2. So I would always get a random partner, not necessarily always someone who would put the work in, if I put it that way. And we were saying, a lot of competitions can be off-putting for people who are new to mooting because there's a lot of research and drafting involved. And if you're new to this and you think, I just want to try some advocacy, you're not going to want to go through all of the rigmarole of having to do the research, the drafting, exchange skeleton arguments, and whatever else is involved just to do a bit of mooting. So between us, we thrashed out this idea for a competition that eliminates all of these problems. So we said, let's make a single day competition. Let's make it speed mooting, so limited submissions. Let's send out the bundle the night before, so it's like life in practice. Obviously, if you're doing because a moot is similar to a court of appeal type hearing, so you wouldn't get the bundle the night before in the court of appeal, but you get the point. In most court hearings, you generally would. So we said, let's send it out the night before, include the pre-drafted skeleton arguments, include all the case law that can be cited, so there's no research or any drafting required. And we make it one-on-one, so that way there's no way that people can go, oh, I had a rubbish partner, because you're responsible for your own performance in the competition. And we said, let's get barristers and solicitors to come in and judge the competition. So from that conversation in the pub, we held the first competition about 6 weeks later. That was how quickly we put that first one together. And that was back in 2012, as you say. We actually held the first ever competition in a Mormon church. Yeah. So it was a brilliant day, and we thought it was just a one-off thing, because it was we just had this idea and thought, it'd be nice to give something back for the next sort of cohort of students. And it was so well received that we had a university reach out to us and say, well, would you like to hold it in our university next year? And we, of course, we jumped on that opportunity. And we said, you know what, why? Because initially we limited it to Northwest students, so students from sort of Liverpool, Manchester, Bolton, basically cities in the Northwest. And we said, well, why not make this a national competition? And we thought, we might get a few people maybe traveling from Yorkshire or something. They came in their droves from all over the country. We had people traveling up from London, down from Newcastle, people flying from Ireland. We couldn't believe how popular the first national competition was. And then from there, it's just spiraled. So that's how we came up with the idea.
That's amazing, and I think that that really shows that you wanted to give back, and you sort of sat there and analyzed what the issues were, and how those could be resolved. And I remember looking at the moot and having done a couple at university, thinking this really is so different to what we normally see, whether that's other external competitions or sort of within the university. And that idea of having the bundle the night before, and whilst there was that pressure of kind of looking at that 24 hours beforehand, it also gave you a very realistic kind of perspective of what life as a barrister can look like. Sometimes even just getting a couple of hours before, and not even having 24 hours to prepare that bundle, and that sort of knockout style competition. From having now done it for over a decade, what have been some sort of experiences or kind of conversations you've had that have been really memorable, and you felt like this competition has really made a difference to people's lives?
Wow. Okay. So I think the big one is whenever I get an email from somebody saying, hi, John, I've just had a pupillage offer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. The speed moose has made such a difference.
Mm.
And we've had a fair few emails like that over the years. And that's always nice to see. I remember a couple of years ago, there was one chap that won the competition. It was his first ever time doing any form of advocacy whatsoever.
Wow.
And he won the competition. So, beat off the other 127 students. And then a year or so later, secured a pupillage. So, it's really nice to see how somebody's come from having done no advocacy experience whatsoever. And I think having the kudos of a national mooting competition on the CV probably looks quite good there. I think also in terms of general conversations, it's a lot of the compliments that I receive from the judges that turn up on the day, because a lot of them, you know, I recruit a lot of the judges through LinkedIn, for example, and you know they have an idea about the competition but have no idea what to actually expect on the day, and it's always so much bigger and it's so much more well organized than they're always expecting. So it's always the nice messages that I receive from the judges afterwards as well, and how keen they are to continue to get involved.
That's amazing. I think, hearing the fact that both students and participants as well as judges have enjoyed it and have gained some value from it. And particularly, I think, that story of someone having never done any advocacy before really shows that it's open to everyone, and it's open, regardless of what experience you've had previous to it. I guess, sort of alongside the competition, you've also started the advocacy club. And I think that that's also important for people who maybe aren't confident enough to enter a competition, but still want to practice their advocacy. So can you tell us about sort of how the club runs and what sort of activities you do during the sessions?
Absolutely. So the idea for the advocacy club, I came up with that during one of the many walks during lockdown. So that's pretty much the only activity we could do during lockdown. So
Yeah.
I came up with the idea. I was chatting to Hayley, who runs Speed Mooting with me, and came up with this idea. And the idea of the advocacy club, as you say, is it's all about practice. So there's no competitive element to it, and it's really low pressure. So the way the advocacy club runs at the moment, we have 2 sessions on Zoom every single month. The first session of the month focuses on either public speaking or debating and alternates each month. So that's generally what we call our non-legal session. The second session of the month is always legal. So each session focuses on a different form of legal advocacy, whether that's trial advocacy, mooting, criminal submissions, civil submissions. So there's lots of different forms of advocacy there. And we always add new forms of advocacy all the time. And what we do is we send the papers a week before the session along with the Zoom link. And there's, once again, the same philosophy, no research and no drafting, because we know how busy people are. And, if it's an extra thing for you to have to go off and research and prepare, that can put people off. So we include everything in the bundle. Sometimes if it's a bit of a tricky legal concept, we'll include a breakdown to explain the legal concept in really simple terms. And then when people join the link, we split people off into rooms of 4 or 5 people, depending on which week it is and what the exercise is. Within their breakout rooms, everyone gets the chance to perform that piece of advocacy. And then within the breakout room, people share feedback with each other. So things that went well and things that can be improved. And the nice thing about that is that people are getting feedback, but it's in such a low pressure environment. It's not like you're at university and being assessed by one of your tutors, or you're in a competition and you're in front of a barrister or a solicitor, and you've got all that pressure that goes with that. So it's low pressure. You receive the feedback, and then at the end of each session, I tend to deliver some feedback on how I would go about delivering that piece of advocacy. So some general tips, hints, and guidance there. And we always receive such positive feedback from members of the advocacy club that say, they've never had the confidence to actually go and perform any form of advocacy or public speaking. But because of that opportunity, they've been able to practice fairly regularly. And in terms of the club, it's open to absolutely everyone. So we've got a handful of A-level students in there. The majority tend to be law undergraduates and bar course/LPC students. But we've even got some graduates in the club and some practicing barristers and solicitors that like to practice their advocacy. So a really broad range of people in the advocacy club.
That sounds amazing. And I think what I really liked about both the way the competition started and the club was, it was a simple conversation in a pub or a walk in lockdown that has converted into something that has helped so many people, and something that has allowed so many people to build their confidence and, their public speaking skills. And potentially someone who had never considered a career at the bar, which is so public facing, may then think, actually, I can do this too. And I have the confidence to go into the profession. From everything we've talked about, it sounds like there was a lot going on, that you sort of managed so many things all at the same time. And one of the aspects and things that has sort of gained in popularity is this idea of sort of work-life balance and ensuring that you have that. Do you feel like you have a sense of work-life balance currently, or do you think that you don't really pay too much heed to that concept?
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? I think it's not necessarily something that I think about that much. Thankfully, I'm in a position in life whereby I don't necessarily need that huge balance. You know, I've not got a family, not got kids, anything like that at this moment in
Hmm.
time. So if I find that I go through certain weeks where um I'm working really long hours, then so be it. You know, it happens occasionally whereby, you know, let's say I've got a pretty lengthy trial on, you know, and you know, traveling to court, in court all day, coming home, additional prep, ready for the next day. So, you know, you might find that, you know, you're not getting much time to yourself there. But I think, and then obviously you've got all the stuff with speed mooting at the same time. But I think it sort of swings and roundabouts, because naturally you'll then find that you have some weeks where you're less busy, you know, it just so
Yeah.
happens. And then you've got more time there. I make sure that I've got good hobbies there that um give me a break from work, basically. So I'm very big into motorsport. So I do karting. So I've got my own go-kart. So I'll take that
Oh,
out to, yeah, it's something I've been into for a few years now. So I'll take that to the track sometimes of a weekend, blast around. You know, obviously I do a bit of racing as well. Quite into my gaming as well. So I do online sim racing. So yeah, so there's always things that I have there that I come back to, and you know, make sure that, you know,
mm-hmm.
I'll have some fun, for want of a better word. But it's not a massive thing. But I think the important thing is, if ever I got to a point whereby I think, do you know what, I've been working a lot recently, I need a day off. The nice thing is, being my own boss, I can do that. I can say, do you know what, I need to take a time off. So this week, for example, we looked ahead. We saw that the weather was nice on Thursday. So Haley and I went to Alton Towers. You might have seen us do a few social media
Yeah.
posts about that. So that, you know, I make sure that I take time to do things that I enjoy. But if I find that there are certain weeks whereby, you know, I'm working long hours, you know, you don't get much time, that's the way it goes. I'm not saying everyone has to be that way. I'm not saying that's particularly healthy, but for me, that works. That's how I operate. Other people might want, you know, they need more of a balance, and that's absolutely fine. And I think you'll naturally find your own balance there. But at the position I'm in life at this moment in time, if I find that there are weeks where I'm working longer, it's part and parcel of the job.
Absolutely. I think that, work-life balance is such a personal thing, and it definitely is never a 50-50 split. And I think it also changes at every point in your life. Like you said, when you do have other priorities or you do have a family, at that point, that may change, and that's okay. And it doesn't have to look the same sort of throughout your working life.
Yeah,
On
I
the
would agree with that. I think it's very much dictated by or guided by your position in life. So, you know, some people
Yeah.
have responsibility, so they need more of
Yeah.
that balance, and things might change for me in the future,
Mhm.
which is absolutely fine. So that might change at some point in the future.
For sure. And you've recently started the Speed Mooting podcast as well, which has been great, and been seeing all the clips as well. So from a professional perspective, what would you say are sort of your goals for the next few years as sort of a practicing barrister, but also sort of your other endeavors like the Speed Mooting and the Advocacy Club?
Yeah, definitely. So certainly from my practice as a barrister, because you know I've only been at the self-employed bar for 6 or 7 months now. So I'm hoping to get involved in bigger and better cases as time goes on. So you know, within the next 5 years, hopefully be continue to really get stuck in, as it were. And then also in terms of speed mooting, I want that to continue to grow. So who knows where that may go. You know, Advocacy Club has grown within 3 years from being sort of 10 sessions a year to running 2 sessions per month. The competitions, we used to run
Mm.
one per year. Now we have 4 sessions per year. We've got a few other events that we run. We're probably going to make an announcement on one of them in the next month or so. So around July, you'll see an announcement on one of our events. It's nothing like anything we've done before. So I just want that to continue to grow and
Amazing.
get bigger and better. And just so I can really help the next generation, because, you know, as I
Hmm.
mentioned, I really struggled getting into this profession because didn't have any connections. I didn't know. You know, for example, I had no idea what the Inns of Court were until I came to the point of applying for pupillage. didn't know about scholarships, anything like that. So a lot of things I was really in the dark about. And even just how to, going in for my first ever pupillage interview, I had no clue. It was a disaster. So that's why we do things like, the Q&A sessions with the barristers where people can come on and they ask questions about pupillage. Haley and I are talking so much about our personal experiences on the podcast, for example. So we just want to make Speed Mooting continue to grow and grow and grow so that there are more opportunities and really help people who come from backgrounds like myself get into this profession.
It sounds incredible, and I know, having seen the trajectory of Mooting over, the last 10 years, I think it's only going to sort of grow from here on out. And like you say, I'm excited for all the announcements that are coming up as well. We always end the podcast with a rapid fire. So these are your last 5 questions on the podcast. So first up, what do you think is the best aspect of being a criminal barrister?
Okay, for me, I like the closing speech. There's nothing like
Okay.
that sensation at the end of a trial, standing up, you've got the 12 members of the jury giving you their full attention, and you get to deliver that speech. It's the one form of advocacy where you can add a little bit of pizzazz, have a little bit of it's almost theatrical in the way in which you go about it. Obviously, you can't go too far, but it's the piece of advocacy I thoroughly enjoy the most.
Okay, interesting. I think good to know for people also who do perhaps would like watching those legal dramas and think, okay, there's one aspect where I can be a little bit theatrical in real life too. The next question is, what does an ideal weekend in your life look like?
An ideal weekend. I would say probably, well, I've mentioned karting, so definitely there's got to be some
Hmm.
karting in there. And then probably to finish, a nice pizza at the end of the day. So pizza and karting.
Love it. Sounds like an incredible combination. Number 3 is, if you could relive a day of your life, which one do you think it would be?
Wow. Gonna sound like I've got an obsession here, but I think the first time ever stepping into a go-kart outdoors, that was I was so excited in the run up to it. So it was one of these. I think it was my 21st birthday, and we'd arranged like a little bit of a karting day at Hooton Park, which is an outdoor track. Um, so it was on the day of my 21st birthday. We went there. We did a sort of full race type session, so multiple heats and a race. And I remember buzzing about that for weeks afterwards. So that's the day that comes to mind.
Okay, it's one that we haven't yet had on the podcast. It's a new one, so that's an interesting addition as well to our list. Number 4 is, in your opinion, which, it can be a TV show, a book, or a movie, do you think depicts the life of a barrister in the UK the most in terms of sort of the realistic aspect of it?
I think Silk. Silk is
Mm.
pretty realistic. It shows everything that goes on. For example, you'll see them in court, and the court scenes are not too dissimilar to what happens in reality. And then, you'll see, sometimes the difficult conferences that they have with clients, they'll pop into chambers. They go, "Oh, we've got this PTPH for you at 11:30. Do you want to run over?" Yeah, fine, whatever. It's like that all the time. Your clerks are constantly on, "Oh, we've got this. Can you do that?" Yeah, go on, I'll squeeze it in. So I think that's pretty realistic. Rumpole of the Bailey, is not too bad either. So I think Silk is more realistic though, but Rumpole isn't too far off the mark either.
Okay. I think we've had Silk before, but we haven't had Wrong for the Bailey. So definitely, maybe 2 for people to check out for sure. And your final question is, if you had to pursue an alternative career path to law, I can sense maybe an answer is karting, but if you had to pursue an alternative career path, what do you think it would be?
I think I would have been an engineer if I wasn't a lawyer. So,
Okay.
I mentioned that I had this dream to be a barrister from about 14 or 15, but I'd also thought about being an engineer as well. And prior to applying to university, I was really weighing up both options. So I knew that I wanted to go to the University of Liverpool because from Liverpool, it's a good university locally. And they have a very good law department and also a very good engineering department. So I'd been down and they do aerospace engineering and they've got a sort of flight simulator there. So I was very, very close to applying for that degree. But I think with this, well, we would we'd just gone into the credit crunch at that time. So I thought law is probably the safer option. So that's why I went down that route. But if I was not a lawyer, I would probably be an engineer.
Wow, I think it's amazing how situation can really determine what you sort of end up going into, and perhaps who knows what would have happened had we not had the credit crunch at
I
that point for
imagine
sure.
speed mooting wouldn't exist.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many people would be like, would be so disheartened about the fact that they didn't have that opportunity. But I think with that, John, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you. And I think particularly for anyone who is interested in the criminal bar, and also anyone who has had those challenges facing pupillage, is really going to take so much inspiration from this episode. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. And you're doing great work here. So keep up the good podcasts.
Thank you so much.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and a massive shout out to John for taking the time to come on the podcast. This conversation has been on my bucket list for a really, really long time, and I'm so glad that this platform has allowed me to finally make it happen. So I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed recording it. As always, please do send your feedback on commercemeetslaw@gmail.com, or you can also DM me on Instagram at commercemeetslaw. And for access to more content, always check out our YouTube channel and our TikTok. For now, take care, goodbye, and I'll see you very soon on the next episode.